Hello everyone and welcome to a weekly webinar, and today's webinar is focusing on providing feedback to students at school and home using G Suite. So we're really focusing today on feedback as our topic. I'm joined today, just to mention, this webinar is one in a series of webinars every Tuesday at 3:30. You can find out more details on our website at bit.ly/GFE UK webinars, where you can also watch back any of the hybrid learning webinars and distance learning webinars from our series of webinars this year. And you can share those webinars with staff and people you're working with. And we also have a resource site at canopy.click/hybrid, where we share all the slide decks, any of the sites we mentioned, any of the resources that we use with any of the webinars are available on our mini site there. So feel free, after today, if you find today's webinar useful for yourself or for other staff in your organization, feel free to share out the resources and the video links with the other staff so we can spread, in this case, different ways of giving feedback to students on the work that they're completing within Google. I'm joined today by Dan Fitzpatrick, who's going to take us through some of the ways in which he uses Google to provide feedback to students. And we're going to focus in on a range of different tools, both core tools within the platform and then some additional add-ons and extensions you can use to leave feedback to students. Dan's going to come up first and talk about how we use Google Classroom and how we could use Screencastify. And then I'm going to follow up by focusing on docs and forms, all as methods of giving feedback to students. So Dan's going to join us. Hi, Dan.
Hello, Andrew. Good to be here.
Great to have you. And we're going to hand over now as you talk about feedback for students, starting with Google. Starting with using Sheets, wasn't it? Yeah, starting with Sheets.
Well, I'm going to, like you said, I'm going to get into Screencastify because I think it's an amazing way to give feedback. So being able to have that personal touch of recording a video and sending it to a student, and a great way to save time as well as a teacher. I also want to get into Google Classroom and some of the various ways that we can give feedback through Google Classroom and how to maybe cut the workload down there. First of all, though, I want to go into kind of how we can deliver feedback in a live lesson. So in this webinar series, we've talked a lot about delivering through Google Meet, whether that be in a hybrid situation. So I'm based in a school in the northeast of England. So excuse the accent if you can't hear me, just if you can't understand the words I'm saying, just in the chat ask me to clarify it. It's my Geordie accent. I can't help it. But I'm in a school. I'm a senior leader in a school in the northeast of England called Tanfield School, and we have adopted the hybrid model for a lot of our students who are isolating at home, who are absent. So what we will do is we will have Google Meet open in the lesson, and the students at home can see what's on the screen in the lesson, and they can hear the teacher teaching in the lesson, and then also teaching to the students in the classroom as well. But also in those circumstances when we are just delivering over a Google Meet to all of our students at home, how can we be a bit more smart with our feedback? And I just want to share a strategy that I've kind of started using, and it mirrors quite a favorable strategy that's used in the classroom at the moment, and that is whole class feedback. Now, why I want to go into this is because I think there's a lot of research being done about how, if whole class feedback is done right, it can be really effective and save a lot of time. And I think I'm right in saying that the big elephant in the room at the moment for the education system as a whole is that teacher workload. Now we know that teacher workload was a big issue before this pandemic, but now, and especially this term, so from the summer up until now, teacher workload is definitely something that's on a lot of people's minds. And there's been some new research come out. So in the last couple of weeks, we've had a report from University College London, their Institute for Education, looked into workload, and they identified that a lot of the admin was what was contributing to teachers' burnout, unfortunately. So, and they identified marking, feedback, and planning as three areas that we should probably tackle. So I'm really excited because of that, because this could actually help somebody in terms of their workload and therefore their quality of life, I guess you could say. I'm really excited to share some of this now. So I'm gonna delve into it. So if I'm teaching through a Google Meet, and I'll go back to some basics just for those who don't know how to get to a Google Meet. So you can see my screen there. I'm on the Google homepage, and I'm logged into Chrome with my account. So I'm going to go up to the waffle icon in the top right hand corner, and I'm going to scroll down to Google Meet. So I'm just going to click Google Meet there, and then I'm going to click join or start a meeting, and I can give it a nickname there if I want to. I'm not going to, so I'm just going to click continue, and then that's going to take me through to Google Meet, and I go through to the starting page where I can check all my settings, and I'm just going to dive straight in. So you can see there that I've joined the Google Meet. Now this will be a Google Meet that I was delivering to my students, whether, like I say, in that hybrid situation or in a situation where I'm teaching solely through a Google Meet to students at home. And I'm sure a lot of you listening are probably doing a bit of both of that at the moment. So like we are. So how would we do that? So I'm kind of a big advocate of when teaching through a Google Meet or through any video conferencing software, really, that a lot of it isn't just teacher talk. Now, obviously, you need your main bit of content for that lesson, whether that be the teacher going through some new content or a video that's helping you with that, deliver that. But then setting the students off on a task. And I think especially if students are at home and they are in front of a computer all day, we want to let them kind of get on with some work independently. And so they're not always continuously having to be staring at a screen all of the time, or being alert to a teacher talking to them all the time. So I would set off my students to do a bit of work, and then I would monitor that work as they're doing it. So I would bring myself off the screen as students are doing their work, and I'm going to jump over to Google Classroom here. And in this scenario, I have set my students some work to write up their market research. Okay, so one of the subjects I teach is business studies. So this is actually a bit of work that we did recently. So if I go into the student work section of that assignment, and then you can see here that I can click on the individual pieces of work for each student. So this is a really clever way of being able to monitor student work, especially in that real time. I'm a big advocate of trying not to take that marking home. Now, I know in reality that can't always be the case, but trying to do as much of the feedback in the lesson, I think, is so important. So closing that feedback loop actually within the lesson is going to have a much more impact on student learning than them getting the feedback at a later date, even the next day. So trying to close that feedback loop actually in the lesson is going to have a massive impact on learning, but also on teacher workload. So you're not taking that home with you, or you're marking it later on that evening. So in my eyes, that's a win-win. If it's going to do better for student learning, do better for staff workload, then why aren't we doing it, I guess, is the question. So being able to look through the students' work, so I'm just going to click on Jess's work here, and then I will be to monitor that. Now, this is where I think we can get really clever. So I could go through and I could mark each individual bit of work, but if I want to do it actually in the lesson time, then what I would like to do is be able to deliver some feedback at the end. And if I'm going through each individual student's bit of work, I'm probably going to run out of time. So, because I could have 30 students in the class. So I want to be able to just go through each bit of work and pick out the key findings. Now, what I would use, and I'm just going to put it on the screen here, is this Google slide. And it's based on quite a popular whole class feedback sheet that is in wide circulation. Okay, so it's out. You can access this. I'm sure you in your school have probably used a version like this. This is a version that I took and I adapted, and I put it onto a Google slide. And it's obviously you can see there the branding of my school all around it there. And what I would do is I'm just going to come out of the presentation here, I would have this on my screen while I'm flicking through students' work. And then what I can do is I can just jump into this slide, and if I see some amazing work that I want to praise, I can fill that in. And you can see this example here. So at the top there, I've got Richard and some mind-blowing knowledge of promotional methods, and some praise for Sophie, Marcus, and Kat there. I've also picked out some spelling and grammar that is going to need addressed, so that you can see there's some paragraph structure and then a few spellings, some presentation points that I want to remind them on, some missing or incomplete work there, some misconceptions, and then I've got my improvement activities. And then I've got a Polaroid moment, which is essentially something that I want to hold up as an amazing example, okay, as a model answer in this case. So as I'm flicking through, I'd be filling that out. So if I've let students go off the Google Meet into their work for half an hour of the lesson to work, I'm just going to be going through and slowly filling out this form. And then what I would tend to do then is I would gather the students back 15 minutes before the end of this Google Meet lesson. So 15 minutes at the start, I would spend roughly on delivering new content, doing some recap questions, half an hour task, gather them back 15 minutes before the end. And I would present this to them. So if I go back to my Google Meet, and then I'm going to click present now in the bottom right hand corner. And I'm just going to click presenter tab because it's just the one tab that I want to share. And here it is, the whole class feedback tab. And I'm just going to share that on the screen with them in the Google Meet, and I'm going to talk through it. So I'm probably going to take about 5 minutes to talk through it. I'm going to pick out those students who I want to give the praise to. I'm going to go through some of the spelling and grammar, and then I want to leave them 10 minutes at the end of the lesson to quickly do some of the improvement activities. And then hopefully the improvement activities that I've picked out for them to do, they can get them done in that last 10 minutes, or maybe they can continue for homework, or maybe it could go on into the next lesson. I think what that helps us to do is to really close that feedback loop. So we've got presentation of new content, the application of that content, and then we've got the feedback and the improvement, hopefully all within the hour, which is phenomenal. If you can get that done in that time, it's really gonna help towards that learning and towards improvement. And it's something that's really simple. In fact, if you're using the Google tools, this will be so simple to do. You've essentially got your Google Meet, you're presenting a Google slide. That's pretty much all it is. But it's how you do that in a smart way. Okay, so doing that, you're not then taking away marking, and you are gonna close that feedback loop within the lesson. So a win-win technique that I found works really well for me, and is also working really well for some of our teachers who are in that situation of hybrid teaching or teaching totally online. Okay, so that's one technique I wanted to share. Another technique I wanted to share is using Screencastify. So I'm just going to go back over to Google Classroom. Here we are. So another way I think that can massively save time. Let's say you're in that situation where you do have to give a bit of personal feedback. So there are a lot of times when that whole class feedback is going to work really well. But then there are times when you're going to need to give some personal feedback that's going to be specific to that student. And one way is that in my teaching is normally coursework. Okay, so where students are working at their own pace, and they might be at different points, and a whole class feedback sheet just wouldn't work in that situation. So I want to delve in and give them that personalized feedback that's going to help them get their marks up. So I'm just going to pull up here an example piece of coursework. So like I said, business studies teacher. So this is an example bit of a business plan from a student here, as you can see, and they've done this in Google Docs. And I want to go through this, and I want to give them some feedback, but I'm going to do it through a video. Okay, so how I'm going to do that is I'm going to use Screencastify. Now, Screencastify, if you go over to the Chrome Web Store, you can install Screencastify on to Google Chrome. And the free version, you're going to get 5 minutes recording time per recording. Now, if you pay for the upgrade, you can have more than 5 minutes. But I really think that you don't really want to go over 5 minutes. Okay, you want to, because again, you want to keep the teacher workload down. And if you're marking a whole class set of coursework here, you don't want to really be going over 5 minutes per video per student. And also, just for the students being able to chunk what they need to do for them, I think less than 5 minutes is ideal, really. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have that coursework in front of me, and then I'm going to open Screencastify. So once it's installed as a Chrome extension on Chrome, it's going to appear up in the top right hand corner, and hopefully you can see that. It's a bit small on the screen, but it's the arrow there, and if I click on it, it is going to open a box, and I don't think you can see that. It's appearing on my screen. Anyway, I'll tell you what's there. So a dialog window opens up, and you're able to, a big blue button says record, and I can set up my microphone and set up my camera, and I can click record. And I will just demo this now. Now, hopefully it's gonna show you how this works. Oh, yes, so you can see there, you can see a little window has appeared in the bottom right hand corner because I set up my webcam and my microphone. So it's going to show me in this recording, and it's going to record the screen. Okay, so I'm able now to go through this piece of work and comment on it. So I could say, so the student here is Tim. So I could say, Tim, really like that first paragraph. I'm going to highlight it there. You can also, within Screencastify, you've got a toolbar as well that you could use. But I think just for this purpose, I'm just going to highlight it and go through and give Tim some feedback on that paragraph, and say really strong opening paragraph. However, it needs a bit more explanation. Okay, so that's very vague feedback. I'd be a bit more detailed on my students' work, but just to show you how I can just talk through that. And then I might want to point out a few more areas, so I might scroll down to another area and just give some feedback on there. And then when I'm confident that I've give Tim the feedback that he deserves for this piece, then I'm just going to stop the recording. So I'm going to go back up to the Chrome extension icon in the top right hand corner, and the dialog box that opens, I'm not too sure why it's not showing up for you, but it has a stop button, so I can click stop, and I'm going to click it there, and that should stop recording. And you can see, so really clever. It's taken the Screencastify's taken the title from the doc, from the screen, and put it as the title up here. Okay, so, but I can choose to change that if I want. So if I just want to put, right, so BTEC business plan, Tim C feedback, and then the date, something like that, then click away from it. That's going to save that, and I can check it, so I can see, right, am I happy with it? I can also snip it down. So like when I was, it's not always perfect, is it? And if you can, when you're learning how to use these tools, if you can do it in one take, then that's amazing. A little bit of practice, and we can do it in one take, but we might need to snip either end. So you know that moment at the start when you're kind of just getting ready to say something, or at the end when you're going up and pressing stop on the record. If you want to snip the ends, then you've got some scissors either end of the timeline down here, and you can just drag them along, and it will just snip the ends there for you if you want to give it a bit of a clean cut. However, I would suggest that if you're doing this for many students in a class, I would just skip that bit. It's just going to take time every time. If you want to do a little bit of editing for each video, you're going to be doing some video editing, and it's going to defeat the purpose of the teacher workload, isn't it? Okay, then you click once you've done that, that's playing back to me there. I'm going to click pause. Once it's done that, you've got various options here. Now, if you just want to be really quick with it, which is what I suggest, then up here in the top right-hand corner, you've got copy shareable link. Now, once you click that, it's copied. It's now in your clipboard of your computer. Now, I do this in two different ways. So I'm going to go back over to the coursework, and just at the top, I'm just going to move his coursework down a little bit, and I'm just going to leave, so my school teachers, when they leave comments, leave it in red. So I'm just going to put link to feedback, and then I'll maybe put the date in brackets. And then just underneath, I'm going to paste. And there is the link to that video. I'm just going to highlight that link and click the link button in Docs. And then I've got the link there. So then when I return that bit of work, so I go back to Google Classroom, click return, and maybe leave a note in. Feedback is in the doc, and then the student, Tim in this case, can click that and watch my feedback and make improvements. Another thing I can do is I can put that link, if I go back to Google Classroom, and when I return work, so let's say it was actually Jess's work. If I click Jess and I click return, she hasn't submitted it, so it's still let me do it. So if I click return and it says there private comment, I could say, please see feedback in this video, and then paste that in there. Click return, and then Jess is going to get a message which says, and you can see at the bottom there, please see feedback in this video. And because I pasted a link in there, Google being really clever, have turned that into a hyperlink. So student just needs to click that, and then it's going to open up that video. And there you go. You can see it just loading up now. And that's what the student will get, and the student can watch that and then make their improvements. Really nice way for that personal touch. I think especially if you are teaching in a school right now where students are isolating, to be able to give feedback where they can see you and hear your voice, I think goes a long way, especially at the moment. But even if we were back in normal times as well, which hopefully we will be soon, that nice personalized feedback, it helps to get the point across to students, I think. And you can go into a bit of explanation about what you expect to see in there. I just think it's a really nice way and will save time. So now that because we were in Google Classroom, let's jump over to giving feedback. And I just want to kind of reiterate what I've just done there. But if you're not using Screencastify and you're just giving whole class feedback, so I'm just thinking one of the ways that we do that at my school is for homework. So each subject has a different night to set their homework, and they do it through Google Classroom. And what we do is we have our individual class Google Classrooms, but we set our homework within a homework Google Classroom for a year group, just for Key Stage 3. Now you might do something similar, you might not, but what that normally means is that we will have 150 students in a year group completing all the work at the same time. Okay, so you will have down this left hand panel that you can see here, you'll have 150 students' names, and you will have their work. We tend to set the work on Google Forms, and then we bring the grades back in, which I think Andy's going to talk about soon. But then given feedback on that, so individualized feedback on those grades, what we tend to do is we will use, first of all, a comment bank. So the way we will do that is we'll use Google Keep. And on Google Keep, you can just keep a list. So on Google Keep, what we tend to do is do like a bit of a sample of students' work. So a student who's done the work really well, student who who needs a bit more of a push and a student who is kind of needing a lot of support. And I'll design kind of 3 or 4 comments based around that, and then I will use them to paste in to the returning comments. So if I'm returning work, so let's say I've got Andrew and Ben here, if I want to return their work to them, like that bit where it says private comment, and then I will paste the comments in there, so you can see there that that is going to send the feedback to both Andrew and Ben at the same time. So if let's say I've imported the grades from a Google form and I've got 50 students who have got full marks, then I'm going to send them all the same bit of feedback, just saying congratulations. I've put some, we have a positive system at our school. I've put some positives on for you, and then maybe a link to a stretch exercise if I want to stretch them as well. So it's just a nice way of reducing that teacher workload, just returning to that elephant in the room, I want to say, that is here at the moment. And I guess it's been around for a while, but it's just these little tips that are going to help bring that down. That UCL study, incidentally, it identified the 55 hours a week that teachers work, and it said teachers who go over 55 hours a week start to have a lower quality of life, and it makes recommendations for bringing that down to 45 hours. So I think every minute counts to kind of bringing those hours down that we're working, because ultimately we want to have a good quality of life. We want to be fresh so that we can give our students the best of us when we are in the classroom and when we are given feedback. So that kind of bulk feedback is going to work well. It's not a catch-all. It's not going to be the most detailed, but as a bulk feedback on, say, something like a quiz, that can be really effective, especially if you've got a whole year group you're giving feedback to. But some of the other strategies I've mentioned, so Screencastify is going to be really personal to each individual student, and then the whole class feedback sheet, going back to the first tool that I demonstrated there, is going to allow you to be more general over a class, but with some specific feedback in there. So hopefully that has helped you with some tips of how to make feedback more effective and efficient using some of the Google tools and Chrome extensions that are available. And I'm going to pass back over to Andy now.
Thanks, Dan. And some great tips there, particularly like some of the ideas around saving teacher time as we go through and leave feedback. I know my screen's going to get shared in now, but I just wanted to start by saying, if anyone's got any questions as we go through today, feel free to ask them in the chat, in the YouTube chat, and at the end of today's webinar, we'll do Q&A from the chat. So I wanted to start off my section. I'm going to talk about Google Docs and Google Forms. But I wanted to start off first just by talking about, well, why give feedback? Why do we need to put feedback on students' work? And I'm a bit like Dan. There's a lot of research out there at the moment looking at the effectiveness of things we do in schools. And one of my favourite bit of research is from the Education Endowment Foundation and their Teaching and Learning Toolkit. And they've gone and researched or amalgamated and pulled together research on the effectiveness of different things that take place in school. And they ultimately come up with a score of the impact in months that a particular strategy has. So if a school chooses to do something, would it improve or not improve the outcomes of the students in their school? And so when we order this in order, feedback is right there at the top. So for what is a relatively low cost, because the presumption is you've already got teachers, feedback can make has a high impact on students. But that's not just me leaving any feedback. That's about leaving relevant and purposeful feedback to my students. And so that's what we want to focus on, is how to do that. And I'm going to start off just by talking a little bit about Google Docs to start with. So here I am in a Google Doc, and I just want to run through some of the ways, if we're just purely using Docs, we can leave feedback to students. And Dan's mentioned some bits of this already. I just want to start. Here's, I've got my letter to Father Christmas, and I'm going to just go through how we might leave feedback. So I think most of us already know that we can just highlight text. And thanks to the recent update now, we get the 2 buttons come up. Put a comment straight away, or even drop it into suggesting mode straight away. So Google Docs can be in editing mode. My document at the moment is in editing mode at the top here. but I can also put it into suggesting mode or just make a quick change if I wanted to. So if I wanted to actually say we need to change this to a capital letter, I can just put those in as suggestions by changing into suggesting modes. And rather than making the change to the document, as you can see, it puts my comments over there as suggestions on the doc. So suggesting mode is one way of leaving some basic feedback, particularly around SPAG, spelling, punctuation, and grammar on a doc. We can also add comments on there. So if we wanted to leave a comment here, we could also go for the comment button and just put a standard comment in here. Let's put don't forget to include the county. So we could just leave a standard comment in that and start to leave comments down the side of the work. And that's just a typical standard comment in Google Docs, which we might leave as a teacher. Further down, we might then decide to do something additional with comments, because that's a standard comment, but we can also increase the importance of a comment by tagging somebody in a comment. So we'll highlight that there, put a comment on, and this time round, I'm going to press the @ symbol. What the @ symbol does is it starts to give me a list of people I contact often. So let's imagine we'll stick with Jess because we used her earlier. We're going to ask Jess to do something specific about this. So please add more ideas to this section. So when we tag someone in, we're actually assigning something that we want them to change. And tagging is really useful when you want to say to someone, I'd like you to improve this section, or I'd like to do this and make this change. Because the most effective feedback is when we're asking students to improve something and actually go back and do that thing again, rather than just telling them at the end that something needed changing. So the most effective feedback occurs during that process of creation. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to assign this to Jess. And as you see, when it says when I assign a task to someone, it says this assignment, the assigned person will be notified, and they're responsible for marking this task as done. So they are responsible, if we use this feature, for making that change, for marking it as done. So tagging someone in has a few actions that occur. When we tag somebody in, they're going to get an email. So Jess is going to get an email off the back of this, and it's going to say, you know, you've been asked to improve this list of Christmas items, and she's responsible for marking it as done. So it's a much higher level comment than we do. Now, when I press assign on this one, something different is going to happen. It's going to just add her in. So there she is. It's assigned to Jess. She's got that piece to mark as done. So those are just leaving comments using the standard tools in Google Docs. Sometimes, though, you might think, well, that's going to get slow. If I keep doing that all through students' work, that could slow me down. So there are ways in which we can improve this process, and we can sort of speed up that process. And one of them is through a Chrome extension. So you may have noticed that when I was highlighting here and leaving a comment, I see this M in my comment box, and that's because I have the Mote Chrome extension installed. So Chrome extensions bring additional functionality into Google and G Suite, and Mote allows me to leave a voice comment in that box. So when I click it, it starts recording, so you can see it's counting down now. My 1 minute 30 seconds is my recording length. So I'm just talking away to Mote, explaining maybe I want the student to do this, a bit like Dan talked about with Screencastify, leaving my comment. And when I press done, it takes my comment there and it just drops it in as a little button. And so now my student, or whoever has access to my doc, can come on here, can click play and hear my voice coming through, as opposed to me writing that. Now, some people love their voice and being recorded, other people dislike it. It's personal choice again. But from a student point of view, like hearing their teacher talk about their work and it being linked to a particular point in the document is a really powerful way of leaving feedback, and potentially faster than just leaving a standard text comment. So you can leave a voice comment in that way, and that's using Mote. There are also a range of Google Docs add-ons that can help us leave feedback on students' work. And so within Google Docs, we have the functionality of Google Docs itself. So we can see here the different options for using the doc. But we can also go to add-ons and bring in some of the add-ons that give additional functionality in Google Docs. So add-ons and get add-ons. Now, depending on the school you're working in, some schools manage their add-ons through their IT admin staff. So you may need to go to your IT admin staff and say, you know, could I have permission for an add-on to be turned on? but there are a range of Google Docs add-ons that help teachers with that process of marking and giving feedback. And so just to mention a few of them, in fact, I've got some turned on already, but Cozina, which is an audio feedback tool, allows us to leave audio comments again on the doc. So a bit like Mote, it's another audio feedback tool that allows us to give verbal comments in on Google Doc. And that one's popular with some teachers, again, who want to leave voice comments at particular points in documents. So very similar to Mote in that sense, but it works as an add-on rather than the Chrome extension. There are also specific tools for certain subjects, things like Jozu that can read the text and find literacy comments, and then specific add-ons for comment banks and teacher feedback. So what I would say is it's always important, if you're thinking about that flow, to think about the add-ons that you could use as you're marking the work. So add-ons. And then the last bit I want to talk about, just while we're in Docs, is don't forget the power of peer assessment. When we are talking about using a Google Doc, we have our big share button at the top here. And from our share button, we can obviously change their permissions. And most of us who are used to using Google are familiar to the idea of putting an email address in there. And we have sort of three big choices: viewer, commenter, or editor. So we can change people's options. So a viewer can just look at a document. If you can comment, that means you can leave comments down the side, but you can't alter the document. An editor means you can just edit and change the document. So often when I was teaching, I would ask my students to go down to this bottom section here, to the link section, and to get the link and to change this link so that anyone with a link can comment. So I would often ask my students to go and get a comment link to their document. So remember, someone clicking that link can't change their document, but can leave comments for improvement. And then often I'd ask them to go over to Google Sheets. So I often had a Google Sheet that looks a bit like this one, where I would ask my students to put their name in, and I'd get them again to edit this. So as long as I've got a blank Google Sheet set up in advance, I get my students to come on the sheet, give them access, put their name in, drop a link to their document in here, and then they would go and select other students' work. Maybe they're looking for certain criteria, so we can use the tick box feature in Google Sheets to identify when criteria has been hit, or maybe they're putting a score in. But what we're asking our students to do is to peer assess each other's work. And again, thinking about teacher workload, particularly if you're asking students to complete work where we're looking for certain criteria that are easily identifiable. And, you know, if we ask them to go and research something, if we ask them to find something out, if we ask them to produce a design in a certain format. And so then, in terms of peer assessment, they can peer assess each other's work and come back to this sheet again and go, well, actually, you know what, I haven't scored well on putting, wise old elf here has clearly not put an address on their work. So again, it's that feedback. They've got that improvement, and they can then go back to that work and make that improvement. So I often had spreadsheets, just, name, document link, ready for my class to do peer assessment tasks. It's a really nice way to get students to share and leave feedback on each other's work. So that's peer assessment. And that's just a quick overview of using some of the tools you can use when we're using Google Docs. I now want to move over and talk about another tool that's great for feedback, and that is Google Forms. So here we are over in Google Forms on a blank form. And Google Forms, a lot of teachers use this already for the purposes of creating quizzes. So creating multiple choice quizzes and creating those assessments in class that mark themselves. But we can't always, as teachers, we can't always do that. Those of us working in schools here in the UK know that at some point we need to move students towards the style of examinations they might face at the end of their courses. So you're going to reach a point in year 10 and in year 11 where, regardless of the level of technology in your school, you're probably going to be doing sort of paper-based mock exams to fit in with the exam style that we currently have. And so those are going to be on paper, maybe students going into the hall, taking the exam, mock exam style. But historically, I always use Google Forms as part of that feedback loop after the exam. So rather than the exam being in Google Forms, what I want to find out from the form is, how did the students get on? And I'm going to use the feedback tools within Google Forms to provide the feedback to my students. So let's imagine my students have gone and done a maths paper, a mock exam on a maths paper. They finished it, and I, as a teacher, have gone through and just given them marks for each question. In the next lesson, they come along and they're going to fill in my Google form. And each of these questions is probably going to ask for a very similar thing. What I really want to know is, in this case, is how many marks did you get in question 1? So I'm just asking a student to look at their paper and to punch into Google Forms, in this case, a number. So I'm using Google Forms. I'm just making sure it comes in as a number. So that they are going to put the number in and tell me how many marks they got in question 1. Make it required, so they've got to fill it in. And then I'm going to go to settings. I'm going to go to quizzes. I'm going to make this a quiz. And I want to do that because what I want to be able to use down here is the answer key and the feedback areas. So I want to be able to use this answer feedback to give feedback to my students, so that when students get a question right, or when students get a question wrong, or score well or score badly, we're going to send them specific feedback based on that question. So let's imagine that my maths question that they've just done on this exam paper was all around area of a triangle. If they get this question incorrect, I might want to provide them with maybe another video to watch. So maybe I'm going to link in here to a YouTube video, area of a triangle. Where they're going to watch a video to learn how to calculate the area of a triangle again. And so what happens is my students after the exam come back into class. They come back into my Google form. They're going to put in the scores they got for each question. And based on those scores they're putting in, the form's going to give them some personalized feedback to what they got on that exam paper. So in the case of my students here, they're going to, if they didn't know how to calculate area of a triangle, they're going to have to watch this video. And maybe I'm going to ask them to answer some more questions before they move on to what they've got for the next question and they work their way through. Because historically as teachers, after a mock exam, we would stand at the front of the class and we would go through all the questions in the paper and talk about how things were calculated. But in reality, for the students in the room, for the students who could already calculate area of a triangle, that is irrelevant. They don't need to know that information. So what we're able to do with Google Forms is personalize that feedback after the exam process has taken place. So suddenly we've got students in our room and what they're all working on is their individual weaknesses. So they're all working on the things they couldn't do, the questions they didn't get right in the mock exam. And then as a teacher, the added bonus of this whole system is that I get a spreadsheet at the back end. So I get a spreadsheet and I get all the marks for every question in the exam for my class. And obviously, if we've been using the same paper across the year group, we could share this form with the whole year group. And again, we'll be able to see the breakdown. And if then, when I'm looking as a teacher, if all of my students can't do area of a triangle, whilst I might still make them watch the video and answer a question, I might also, as part of my teaching and gap analysis, start to identify that to be retaught again, or maybe just additional work on that. And at a broader school level, let's imagine the head of department looks, and if none of the students in year 11 can do area of a triangle, I would imagine they'll be worried. But they might want to look at the curriculum, maybe look at what's going on in Key Stage 3 to see, well, what is it that's leading to the point that we're getting all the students in a mock exam and they can't answer this question. So we can do individual feedback to students, but then that power of bringing all the data in through Google Forms allows us to do sort of gap analysis and bigger pieces of work with Google Forms. So when we think about these sort of feedback loops we can build, we can start to be really powerful with the information that it's telling us at the back of that. And don't get me wrong, I fully understand that this takes time. Building a Google form to hit all the topics in a mock paper is going to take time the first time somebody builds it. But once it's built, it can be reassigned. A lot of departments use similar papers, can be reassigned year after year, used for different mock exams and shared with the staff across the department. And that's where the real savings come in. That's where the real efficiency savings come in once we start to reuse and share that content. And so that's just a way of using Google Forms when we're giving feedback to students. We're sort of approaching the point now where we're going to move to some questions, if there are any questions in the chat. So I know Dan is going to rejoin me. And we're going to go through any questions that we have. And I think at the moment, Dan, I don't think there are any questions. So we might finish with some just tips that we may have between me and yourself for feedback or time saving with teachers.
Yeah.
Do you want to start or give me start?
Yeah, I was thinking when you were saying there about how we can sometimes make this look really simple and basic, but actually if you're not familiar with the tools, it's going to take you a while to get to learn them. And just this seems to be my favorite subject tonight. But going back to that UCL report that I mentioned on teacher workload, which just come out a couple of weeks ago. One of the things they said was that the teacher workload, the things that seem to contribute to that were with things like I said, the more admin type tasks, so the planning, the marking, the feedback. However, the teachers wanting to participate in CPD didn't seem to have an impact on it. So teachers were actually really keen to want to take part in CPD. So I think coming onto a webinar like this, and I guess we've seen it, haven't we, Andrew, in terms of since March, since we went into those full lockdowns, that the teachers have kind of been hungry for online learning. And we've seen a lot of CPD going online, and teachers really using their own initiative to discover how to be more productive, especially within online learning. So I guess if that does ring true, then hopefully these webinars can help, and that little bit of extra CPD, although it's going to take time now, will hopefully shave off those minutes, which will add up to hours, which will add up to days in the long run.
Yeah, and I think as we talked about, I mentioned a few times, don't forget there's a range of resources available from Google to support you if you are new to Google Forms, new to Google Classroom, new to G Suite as a whole. The Google for Education Teach Center is a great starting place on your journey, and on there you can complete some online courses either by looking at an overview across G Suite or by looking at in the product guides by product. And so if you are thinking, well, how do I build a form that does all these things or give feedback, feel free to visit the Teacher Center for more advice. There's some great tips in there. And then the other thing I would say is that there's lots of, you're not the first people to use things. There's a lot of sharing of good practice out there in terms of on the web, out on Twitter. And there's some of the people who now chat are quite prolific sharers. So there is that as well. And then the other thing I would say is, share that workload. I always traded stuff within my school. Like, I'll make a form for year 10 geography if you make the year 11 geography form, and just that, that negotiation, that sharing of that stuff. I think that can really smooth things out as well, because once you've got this stuff, that's when the real time savings, I think, kick in. Once you've built these things, once you've got the sheets or the forms or the documents you're going to use. We've had a question come in from Tyson Holly. Can you share a link to the whole group rubric? Yeah, so we've got a website that we use to sharing all our resources. It's at canopy.click/hybrid. And so what we'll do is after today's session, we'll put the recording from this session and a link to all our resources. And so I'll get Dan's the whole group feedback sheet, and we'll put that in there as well. So if you want to get a copy of that, you can do. If that's okay with you, Dan?
Yeah, of course. I'll send over the template and we can use that. I think what excites me as well is how all this can form a lesson. So all these individual tools, how the best of these and figuring out what works for you can actually help to build the full lesson. So I'm just thinking in terms of the Google form, I would use that if I was doing a live Google Meet lesson in a synchronous way. I'd probably use that Google form as my recap starter. So at my school we do a lot of interleaving questions based on the research there of how that can help with memory in the long term. So I use a Google form for that. So and the ability then to, especially for interleaving, I know this is becoming a big thing in a lot of schools now, that interleaving questions, is that you can then import questions from previous Google forms, which I think is a massive time saver. So I might say, right, I want to actually, the lesson I'm doing requires a bit of knowledge from a lesson 2 weeks ago. So I'm going to import that question in just at the start of the lesson to see if they've understood it. And then using what Andrew said in terms of that individual question feedback, then within the first 5 minutes of a lesson, the student could have answered a question and gotten feedback in that first 5 minutes, which I think is amazing that the technology can allow us to do that. And then as we go into a more substantial task where students are demonstrating skills, then being able to bring in something like that whole class feedback form, I think them going into being the components of building up a lesson so that there's regular feedback throughout a lesson, I think is really exciting. And I think that's where technology kind of enhances what we're doing.
Thanks, Dan. Just a quick reminder from me, don't forget, we've shared it in the chat already, but we have a feedback form for all these sessions. So feel free to head on over to Google Forms and give us some feedback on today's session. I just wanted to also end today by thanking someone who we never get to see in the calls, because for the last, probably since lockdown started, Sky from the Google team has been looking after our webinars, making all our graphics appear at the right time, asking our questions in the chat, and making sure that me and Dan come on screen looking professional. I want to thank Sky because I think this is her last webinar of the run. So just a big thank you to Sky. But we have got one more webinar in this series. Don't forget, we are back next week, even though Sky's not. We are back next week for one final webinar. So thanks to Sky for all her work, and thanks for everyone for tuning in. Feel free to share. If you found this video useful, feel free to share it with the teachers you work with, and we'll see you all soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye.